So basically, I'll try and give you through a relatively straightforward scenario. I don't know if you've ever went online and
I
like
have.
clever. Don't know if you've ever
There's
went
your
online.
intro for this one.
Ah, fucking knocking it apart. It's 5 minutes in. Oh, I love that.
So quite a science-orientated week this week because you've been looking into something along those lines as well.
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, I think it's pretty relevant because I want to talk about this week specifically like the whole scientific publication, and like how that whole process works. I don't. We both like went to uni and that type of thing. We both probably spent times working around academic papers, but near the end of my time in university, when it became clear that like I was either going to go for a PhD or do something else, as I learned more and more about science and publications, I started to realize like how much of science exists just to publicize your work at the end of the day. And I started getting like certain ideas about it, and as like my girlfriend, she started moving towards the scientific communication industry, I started learning a huge amount more about this and having an idea about how these organizations work. And basically kind of the one takeaway I have is that I think this is actually super bad for mankind, so I think that'd be quite a good one to discuss this episode.
Yeah, I don't. When you went to uni, and obviously I was at uni at the same time, and you started to tell me about these publications, you started to speak about the project you were working on over the summer and how you were trying to get your work
Yeah.
published.
Mm-hmm.
That, as an engineering student, I don't think that was something that was ever really broadcasted to us, and I don't think it's something that the general public knows about either.
I think
In
you're
terms
right
of like
there.
scientific publications, I don't think people are aware of what these even are. So maybe, I don't know if you could give us like a brief
Mm-hmm.
rundown of what those are, because you probably educate me a little bit as well. Cause
Yeah.
my understanding is that there's like advancements in science that are like published. It's like as research gets deeper into these areas, they're like published journals, but that's as far as it goes for me.
Right, yeah, you're right. That's something I'm going to talk you through the process of because it's relatively simple. But the thing is, you're right. I think basically no one knows how this industry works, and basically it's how science makes money. Because now we were just saying when we were talking about NASA, there we're saying like science is fundamentally it's like kind of a black hole in itself. It's because you don't know what the results you're going to do are. You don't know if it's going to make money. You don't know. Well, most of the time it's not going to make money anyway because you're not doing it for an industrial application. You're just asking a question and finding an answer. So how the hell does science make money? And it turns out it's through this entire process of publications. Publications is quite literally what the entire world of science revolves around. It's what, as a scientist, you're aiming to do, and it's what like the scientist that's in charge of you, that's their job. See like the scientist managers, all they think about is publications and funding. So basically, I'll try and give you through a relatively straightforward scenario. I don't know if you've ever went online and
I
like
have.
clever. Don't even remember
There's
went
your
online.
intro for this one.
Ah, fucking knocking it apart. It's 5 minutes in. Oh, I love that. But when like you were researching in uni and like doing your dissertation and stuff like that, you obviously used citations. You obviously used papers, right? You looked at
References,
academic.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And like you'd go online and you'd like say like, well, obviously you were part of your uni at the time, so your university would have a license. But oftentimes, especially what I do in my work, because I still work in science, but I don't work within an educational body, is that I'll try and read a certain academic paper. And it'd be like, to read this paper, pay £30. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? Or log in with your institutional details. It's like, shit, so I can't actually access this. Actually, the most expensive paper that I've tried to read was £4,000 to read it once. It's like, well, I guess I'll just try and do my job and not have this knowledge type of thing. And it kind of leads you to question, it's like, okay, so publication is charging £30. Where does that even come from? To start at our basics, imagine we have a scientist working in a lab. They'll have like an experiment that they're working on for a certain amount of time, and they'll like, so for instance, like they'll try and look at coming up with a new waveguide to try and make light travel through an optical fiber with higher efficiency than they have before. That's something I did in the lab. So
Did you do a basic example?
okay, they're working on some type of science, and basically they'll do it over. They'll study it for 2 years, and then they'll spend all that time and they'll put it all together, write it all up, and then eventually have their paper. The scientists themselves, their salary is paid by taxpayers because the vast majority of scientists are paid by work in universities or government institutions, and it's all funded by taxpayers. And the actual funding itself, which pays for like the software, pays for the equipment, it pays for the machinery, that is also paid for the taxpayers. So they've created this piece of work over the course of several years that was paid for by their effort and the taxpayers. They'll go to a publication house. A publication house owns journals, and a journal would be like New Scientist or like Nature magazine, these type of journals. And the idea is that the publication will look at your work and they'll take a look at it and they'll go, okay, this could probably fit within our journal. So what we're going to do is we'll double check it, spell check it, and that type of thing, and then identify professionals within the field that you work in, and we'll get them to proofread it and to peer review it, which is a super, super important concept in science, to make sure that what you've written isn't absolute bullshit. And then this peer reviewer will hand it back to them and it'll get published. But the peer reviewer as well, they aren't paid, So you've got scientific work that's being produced and it's being funded by taxpayers. You have the peer review process that's being unpaid for. It's like a pro bono type of work.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
There we go. It's the phrase I was going for is it's like you scratch my back, I scratch yours, because the idea is that every single scientist will need to do a peer review at one point in their life. But then the publication takes the paper, puts their stamp on it, and then puts it in a magazine and sells the magazine back to universities. And the university will pay either like a yearly subscription for all these magazines, or they'll just pay like for online access or that type of thing. And basically, once you take a step back and realize, you think to yourself like, why the fuck is this publication taking profits for something that's been paid for by the taxpayers, and then paid for by the taxpayers again through the funding, and then peer reviewed pro bono? Why are they charging you £30 to view that paper, or potentially charging your university tens of millions of pounds a year to reach that paper?
Mm-hmm.
Like, compare that to normal journalists, which for like fucking like The Economist, they will have journalists that they will pay a salary, and they will spend time on the ground doing research, writing this type of thing, and as a result they'll produce paper. So like basically what you find is that scientific publications, they make money hand over fist. They're like fucking loaded. To give you like, remember you said that people don't even realize how big this industry is. You're like so fucking right, man, because apparently scientific publishing comes right between the music industry and the film industry, which is like has such massive reach across the entire world. Publication industry is worth like 40 billion a year, and like the actual people that work within it are just like, there's like thousands of them. So the amount of money that each people is individually dealing with, the amount they have to pay on payroll for their staff as well, is absolutely minuscule. So I sent you an article before this to briefly read over by The Guardian, and one of the stats that they had was that one of the biggest companies that works within this field, which is called Elsevier, Elsevier in 2018 had a profit margin of 37%, compared to like the tech giants of the world, which are sitting at like a fucking measly 20%. And it's just like, why do we have this system in place in which there's so much power to one company?
So to wrap my head around this, I'm going to put this in an example that I can understand. So as I was a aerodynamical engineer at uni, so I'm thinking about this in this example. You've got a bunch of guys in the lab who are trying to discover a new type of wing profile, so the shape of the wing on like a plane. They've got like a big wind tunnel, and they're doing like a bunch of experiments and like lift and drag and things like that. They'll then write a paper based on their findings.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll put a bunch of different shapes in this wind tunnel, and they'll do a bunch of lift drag experiments to see which one would be the best for a plane. They'll then take this to, and that's all university funded.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They'll then take this to the publication, and they'll say, "Can we put this in your journal?"
Mm-hmm.
The publication will then say this has to be peer reviewed, which is by other scientists which are in the field, which are other university scientists.
Mm-hmm.
They'll peer review it and they'll send it back, and then they'll put it in the journal, and then they will sell that back to the university in the journal.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, in order for you to see it, you either have to pay a subscription to the journal, or go online and buy the single paper, or be part of an institution that pays for it for you.
Yeah. Like if you write a paper and it's your own work, you cannot legally distribute it because it officially belongs to the publication house. They have copyright when they publish it. So the work that you've been doing is no longer yours, you know?
Yeah, so taxpayer pays for it in terms of the experiment. Taxpayer pays for it in terms of the peer review, and then taxpayer pays for it again when the university buys it back. And then
Yes.
potentially another time after that, if taxpayer wants to view it themselves.
Yeah. So it's like it's quite unbelievable, actually, and it's like such a massive industry, and people have such little idea about it. And it's like one of those things. It's like it's something we need to talk about, because I think if you told that to anyone in the street, they'd say to you like, that's an absolute scam. You know, there's something wrong there. There's something fundamentally wrong there. And I think there is. So what we can talk about, I think, is some of the ramifications in place. And I can like, yeah, give you briefly tell you about how this even happened in the first place. It was basically just all to do to fucking some journal mogul back in the 60s. It was called Robert Maxwell. And basically he's like the reason that we have the science publication scene that we have right now. Because like, it's weird to think about, but see, back in like the 60s and the 50s, making science, working in sciences didn't make money. You know, if you were a scientist, well, these days it's still the case, like you're not going to make money, but like the actual act of it, the act of people getting in funding and universities, it was super, like there was no money to be made here. But this Robert Maxwell, he came from journalism, and he's the reason that we have, like, for instance, like he introduced journal subscriptions. He introduced the subscription model. He introduced like a bias towards controversy and novelty. He introduced like, well, he's part of the reason why this industry is so monopolized in the first place. And of course as well, he introduced this whole concept of there being like prestige in different journals. So like this one guy is the reason that this all happened, and it was basically, he was just some fucking asshole that saw a huge amount of value, because you had scientists that were doing these papers, doing this work, and it was all being paid for the taxpayer, and they were just sitting on it, sitting on piles and piles and piles of information. And that information, he realized that I can turn that value into profit. Yeah, he can turn that into profit. So what he did was he looked at a chain which already existed, took a scoop out of it, and then sold it back to the people. And it's like one of those really fucking bizarre scenarios where like your customer and your supplier are the same person, but at the same time, because you're dealing with scientists who are just like, they live in another world, man. They don't have any concept of money. Like, see, when a scientist,
they're not socially capable scientists. No, they're not
socially capable, man. Like, see, in terms of thinking about money, is not what scientists do. They just need whatever lets them do their experiment. You know?
Yeah, I honestly believe that once you get to a certain point of like that level of like intelligence that's needed to innovate on these things, I think you start concentrating on the intelligence of it all, and other areas start to like go away. Like, it seems like there's a massive amount of like, when you look at Elon Musk, that guy's like extremely intelligent, obviously he's a complete innovator, total genius. Socially, I could not talk to him, I don't think. You know, you listen to him on like Joe Rogan, and you're like, you don't seem like
parties.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't know how to talk to people, I don't think. It's the sort of thing, you know. And I think it just seems like it kind of gets to that point for me. Well, to bring it back to the journals though, I get what you're saying when this seems like it's getting paid from the taxpayer at all different levels, and the journals seem to have monetized this in a way that seems like a scam. To buy some, to sort of like get your supplier to pay for it, but then to also get your customer, who is the supplier, to then pay for it again. Again at the end. You can see how there's a problem there, but you can also see how the system sort of is set up in a way that it needs to be, though, because an example I used earlier, when the guys are like in the lab coming up with a new like wing design, they'll be doing that so that the plane can become more efficient, so that it can use less fuel, you know, maybe get a further distance based on the tank of fuel that it's got. So it's like innovations for the industry, which are necessary. It's also necessary that this has to be peer reviewed, because you can't just have people posting whatever they want. Sure. So there needs to be other recognised professionals that are looking at this and verifying that it is actually a good piece of work and the research you've done is good. And there also has to be a body in which says that it will take on the paper sort of thing, and
someone needs to do the admin. Sure.
It'll take on the admin, it'll do the spell check and things like that, and it'll basically sort of verify it on its own, and it'll publish it as part of a group of these papers. So it does seem like all of these parts are like necessary cogs in the machine for me in order to get these things verified.
It is being satisfied. I get that.
But it's somehow developed itself in this really scammy way where all of a sudden the publications make all of the money 3 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
How has that happened? I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. Basically, like, you know how I've had that Robert Maxwell guy? I think he's basically like single-handedly destroyed science. So like the thing is like the model exists as it exists. You know, like basically the fact that scientists do the money and then they pay for someone else to like do a little bit of admin work and then the person pays it back to them. That's the way it exists. That's the way it always has existed, type of thing. You know, like before publication outlets existed, scientists themselves had to try and deal with distribution. There was no central body which dealt with the distribution of science. And obviously when it comes to science, like the whole concept of making sure everyone's on the same page is like, it's absolutely fundamental. It's not even, it's not a type of thing that you can just like, oh, ideally we'd all be reading the same, would all be on top of the latest technology. It's like, if you want to work in, for instance, like working with like optical fibers and physics, you need to be reading about the latest papers this month. Otherwise you'll fall behind, you know, like it's one of those like absolute necessities that needs to be there. And it basically seems that like these publishers, as soon as they realized there was necessity for it, they identified how to make money, and it's just been that way. It's been that way ever since.
The question I have right now is why, how did it develop in such a way that the scientists are just giving the journals their papers? That's the weird bit where it's like they're giving them a product. Like it's like they're supplying them, but they're not charging them for the supply.
Yeah. It's because scientists, no, you just said, like, they think differently. See, for a scientist, you've not made a product. For you, the reward is being publicized.
Sure.
All you want is other people to see it, you know? Like, that's the reward. The whole concept of money is, like, it's out with this equation. It's literally a bunch of, like, publishers that are, like, hyper financially savvy that have realized the value that scientists have fucking literally under their fingertips, and the scientists have just went, ah, sure, you can have it, you know? Like, see when like a big magazine like Nature magazine says to you, we'll publish it, and they hand you a form to sign. You're not going to read that form. You're going to sign that as soon as you fucking can, because that's who you publish now. That's what matters, you know? It's the whole industry of science, and this is actually one of the ramifications, I think, of this system, is that like, you need to publicize now in order to be a successful scientist, and the publications want that, you know? Like, basically it exists in a fucking monopoly right now, is that people can't, like, you need to be a scientist, you need to keep publicizing, and you need to keep reading other people's publications, there we go. And one ramification is that as well, is that, from what I seem to understand, is that publications is a complete and utter monopoly right now. Like, there are basically 5 publication houses which control around about 50% of every single paper that's being submitted and publicized, you know? And one of the things, well, obviously that leads to like prices increasing, like we said earlier on, like we said in a previous episode, and it obviously leads to as well like them like controlling competition and having, you know, monopoly-like influence and that type of shit. But I think there are actually quite a few other ramifications which, as a result of them being a monopoly, and also terms of like control of the science and the direction that the scientific community is having to take.
Well, yeah, if there's only like 5 of them, if you're not getting published in one of these 5 journals, it's like you're not a scientist like worth your salt, sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
The thing that gets me about it is that it seems like these publication companies are getting a lot of free labor. Yeah. They're getting people, like, they're getting boots on the ground, people doing the work, the grunts, which are the scientists in this case. Mm-hmm. They're also getting people to peer review the work.
More scientists.
Which are more scientists. And they're getting all these people to do these things so that they can sell a product. There seems to be no other instance in the world where you go to a supplier and you get something and they just give you it for free.
Yeah, it's very untraditional that way. And I swear, I genuinely believe that now we're talking about it, this is the type of scenario that could only happen if the people selling you the product were scientists and they were so fucking unaware of what they're actually dealing with. Scientists are a brilliant example. Scientists are a brilliant example of what people can achieve when they're just interested in one thing. You know, we're talking about like how corruption ultimately destroys all. Well, like, scientists, they're not corrupt. You know, like, these people, they just want to create more science, and they want their name to be known by other people so that they can share their science. It can all just build upon each other. The example of corruption in this industry is another industry latching onto it. you know, because they saw that these were a bunch of souls that were incorruptible with all this value, and they were doing absolutely fuck all with it.
You know, for all the preaching that I do about people like money corrupting people and things like that, which I still believe, it really
Mm-hmm.
shows you an example of like an industry that is pure and just wants to do things for the advancement. Like it gets funding and it actually does what it should be doing with it. It publishes papers, but then you can see how that immediately it's taken advantage of when it is pure like that, because it wants to be pure. It's not very corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
It uses the funding to like do what it wants to do just because it wants to do it, and then immediately something else latches, like a leech latches onto
Yeah.
it and just turns that into profit, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not, the publications aren't getting, they're not getting paid three times. The state is paying for it three times in order to get it published, but the publication is literally just selling its product. You know,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
you can see how that is like useful. The problem is they seem to be getting all of their supply on a freebie, and
Yeah.
they're just laughing it up right now. They're just literally putting these documents through spell check, getting somebody to read it, make sure it makes sense, literally,
Yeah.
like
Uh-huh.
makes sense, and then shipping it off and then selling it again. You know, it seems like there's a very short workload there to
Yeah.
get it
It's fuck all.
sorted. Basically, all the work gets done by someone else, and then they just charge you. They just shag you right up the arse for the pleasure of reading it. You know?
Yeah, I know. And that's what's the worst part about this, is because like, see the scenario we have here in which someone is like being absolutely, the scientists are being absolutely shafted, and publication companies, sorry, are like absolutely reaping profits here, like hand over fist. As I said, the problem is actually a lot worse than that, because like that's just an injustice, you know. But like you said, it's like an example of another entity coming over and like being corrupt and that type of thing. But the problem actually is the inherent control that these publishers end up exhibiting over science. Because as I said, like, there's only like 5 companies that deal with around about 60% of every single paper that's ever being published. And as I also mentioned, for a scientist, all that matters to you is being published. That is like, from the people that gets funding for your lab, they're like in talks with magazines talking about what's the type of thing that's going to get them, how they're going to get funding, and how you're going to get funding is by getting published. So what ends up happening is that these different outlets have huge amounts of control over the science that's actually being studied. You know, it's because when a lab manager, when they're trying to get their budget for the year, they're only really going to be looking at something that they have a really good idea is going to get published. You know, and
Sure.
unfortunately, publishing companies, they have certain things they like to get published. So, for instance, they like things if it's like, see if it causes a controversy, they're going to love it. It's because it means it's going to make more sales. If it's like novel and it's been new and it's kind of like breaks the box, going to be more sales. There's like for a couple of other examples here. One of the things is that like they don't like replication. So like one of the things about science, one of like the
Sure.
holy factors of science is that you take a result, do an experiment, and take a hypothesis, do an experiment, get your result. Well, traditionally within science, to confirm that what's happening in these papers isn't complete bullshit, what you'll do is what's called a replication study, and you'll take their paper, you'll follow the instructions exactly, and then republish the results. That's no longer, well, some journals actually don't allow that. That's no longer even allowed. It's because it doesn't sell as much, you know. It's because people have already read about it already. It's like, fucking, why do I care
Yeah,
about that? Throw
you
it over their
wouldn't buy
shoulder.
this. You wouldn't buy it again
Yeah.
if all it did was confirm the results of what you already read. Yeah.
And like, what's the worst part for me actually is that, like, see the whole concept of like a scientist toiling away for like years and years and years, in order to get like a really breakthrough event. So see, for instance, see the guy that mapped the human genome. He hadn't publicized the paper in 10 years, in 10 full years. Higgs, he publicized like 3 papers over his entire life, and these are 2 of the most like revolutionary scientists that we've ever had. In today's environment, they would be fired because they do not publicize, and people get their funding through publications, you know. So it's the problem is actually a lot deeper than someone's being shafted financially here. The problem is that we are changing the scientific landscape based on a fucking journalism company. We're trying to make like, you know, news headlines. We're trying to like, so like, for instance, COVID this year. See if you're researching COVID, you had fuck tons of funding. Do you think any of these people that were actually researching COVID came anywhere close to coming up with an actual novel cure for COVID. There's no fucking way, man. They just wanted to get published, and that's a perfect example of it.
Yeah, there's only a few companies that actually did go towards, or did successfully get a vaccine, I guess. Although, were they even like, I don't know if the people that developed the
Well,
vaccine, were they trying to get published or were they trying to sell the vaccine?
well, yeah. I mean, yeah, that they probably would have been trying to sell a vaccine. I was just more trying to imply that in science, there's now like a culture of fads, and it's like I notice it a huge amount because I work in spectroscopy, so people every couple of years start using spectroscopy to investigate what's ever the latest fad. So the last couple of years, it's been graphene. People have been fucking obsessed with graphene, and if you're doing some type of research into graphene, you're going to get funded. Before that, it was platinum on gold, which is like a new type of way that we deposited platinum on gold to make it a more effective catalyst. And before that, it was carbon nanotubes. And like each like chunk of 4 years, that's all the science industry has a hubbub about. It's because that's what's getting published, So it's like it almost feels to me as if what we have right now fundamentally weakens the scientific institution.
Yeah, well, again, we're coming back to the idea that once this becomes about money, once money like corrupts it,
Right.
all of a sudden it influences the way it works in the first place. And you talk about these, you think about revolutionary scientists, like you talk about Higgs, talk about like Einstein, like Newton, all these people. I guess they all published papers eventually, but like, if they existed in today's environment, what would that have meant?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think are some of these scientists like A-list celebrities in their field? Are some of these scientists like the equivalent of like Brad Pitt, and they'll get
Oh,
published?
sure.
They'll get funded no matter what.
Yeah, you're right. And the thing is as well that you tend to find that most really good scientists get published all the fucking time. It's because like they are really good at what they do and they know how to game the system, so they know how to get funding in for their labs. Like they work within the environment they have right now. But you're right, there are certain names which I'm sure will get published to a large extent. There's other really complex factors to it as well, because it's like within the environment that we now work in, like the prestige of a journal has a huge effect on the standing of the scientist. Like you just don't want to get publicized by anyone. You don't want to fucking get fucking publicized by your Tom, Dick, and Harry publicized journal outlet around the corner. You want to be in like either Cell or Nature or New Scientist. Those are the big ones. And then all of a sudden, that results in these three particular journals having like almost unimaginable power because everyone within the entire scientific community wants to get in them. So then the people that are actually, they're editors, the people that are like looking at these papers going, yep, no, yep, like the amount of power they have over the development of mankind is actually quite crazy when you think about it. I'm not trying to say they're changing the world or anything like that, but like when you think of the power that these people really do have in terms of setting trends going forward, it's not insignificant.
Well, the other thing that I was talking earlier about how the general public, and even myself to a degree, I don't, and they probably don't understand the influence that these papers are having on the world.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine that when innovations occur, when you get, and maybe this sounds a bit stupid, maybe when the next iPhone comes out and like everyone like rushes to buy it, there must be like some technical innovation in there, when there's like a better camera or there's a faster processor or it can load things quicker. Something about the internal system of that phone has been, well, I mean, I'm not sure if an iPhone generation to generation, like it's debatable how much innovation there is. But think about like the iPhone 1, for example, to the iPhone now.
Mm-hmm.
There must have been so many technological advancements in the actual circuitry and in the components and in the electrical systems there. Those things would have been published, right? There would have been there would have been scientific investigations into the efficiency of the chips and into the LED screens, and these things all got better.
Yeah, it's incremental progress. That's the key. These fields of science, they don't come forward leaps and bounds. Leaps and bounds. It's like a small thing over the decade. Like a new paper gets published every 30 seconds. Like these things happen all the fucking time, and most of these will get cited maybe once if you're lucky. A lot of these papers you'll cite, you'll put into the world, and no one will ever look at them because you can tell how many times it's been cited, and like you'll consider yourself really quite popular if you had like 40 citations. Like a couple of people in my department at university had a couple of papers that were sitting at like high 50s. It's like fucking hell, he's a big name, isn't he? That type of thing. But you're exactly right. Like Industry relies upon the science, but you cannot rely upon science to make money, because the things that you carry out aren't necessarily going to result in something. So here's another point actually about the ramification of this system. And I mentioned this in the last episode as well. We don't know if, when you start a scientific experiment, what the result's going to be. That's the whole point of what you're doing in the first place.
Sure.
But you're hyper incentivized to get publicized. And publicizers, the amount of times I've fucked up that name in this episode is going to actually appall me when I watch this back, by the way. But the amount of times that publications, they really, really don't like experiments that have had a negative result. See, if you think like, we're going to investigate, photon mobility in this type of semiconductor, and then the takeaway is that, oh, it's not very good. They're not interested in it. So it leads to this environment in which people come up with experiments that they think are going to lead to a certain result. And then it also introduces like all this horrible unconscious bias stuff where, like, the people that write these papers, they know what the data does. They understand how the data all connects to each other. So see, when it comes to like data gathering, it's a type of thing. A great example is like, so you'll be heading towards, you'll be gathering data, and it's like, according to a curve, it's like, okay, I think it's doing what I want it to do, but like, I'm not quite close to like enough of it's called p squared. P squared is all to do with your confidence in your result. It's like, I'm not quite close to like 5% p squared, so I'll just do a couple more data points type of thing. You do a couple more data points and you like get to p squared. It's like, there we go, fucking got it. Hand in the paper, get publicized. If you were to actually keep doing measurements, you might find that the trend wasn't there, but because you know that you've got now a 5% p squared value, that's what a publication house requires in order to publicize you. You're like, slap that right over to them. And also that it leads to like a bunch of other horrible stuff as well, where like people will deliberately not falsify results, but deliberately deal with their data in a certain way to get a result. So now I said that it's like p squared value, it's actually like super, super important. It's basically it's like the percentage of you getting a non-negative result, I think. So if you want to prove that this color is red and you have a p squared value of 5%, then only in 5% of the cases, if you asserted that to be red, would you be wrong. Does that make sense?
Sure. So you have like a 95% accuracy.
Yeah. I don't know why I went the opposite way around there, but yeah.
Me neither.
Yeah, it's because that's what the P is. Yeah. So that's a main indicator in most scientific journals. Like, they're not interested if you don't have a p squared of 5%, then like fucking walk away. So it's lead to like an entire area of science called like p hacking, which is basically
hacking. Amen.
And Amen. Might got that. But yeah, it's basically led to people deliberately manipulating their data so they can get certain results. And you do this by like deliberately taking a small data set, or like by deliberately having a large degree of unknowns, or deliberately having a this, or deliberately having a that. We're basically at a stage now where people in science, and I obviously talk about this from like a physics perspective, but like all science, even hard and soft, they're now at a stage where it's super, super easy to manipulate your data to get you a p squared value of less than 5%. And a lot of the time, because like publicizing is like so money driven, people in recent years have started to discover that actually a huge amount of papers that are being publicized and being peer reviewed maybe should never have been peer reviewed. Like, things are getting through the cracks that are just like fucking wrong. And
yeah, that seems like the inevitability of like the corruption, though, right? Like, as soon as you started saying that, I was like, yeah. As soon as it became about getting published and making money, you can see how, as a private entity, it just immediately starts to cut corners. As soon as you can't get your things published anymore, you just cut the corners to get it done. Like before that, you were talking about things that were like fads, things that were popular in science, and I can like sort of look at those and think to myself, that's almost a market,
yeah,
where the market is sort of dictating what gets published, and I can even see how that might be innovative in a way, sort of thing. Where if like we're talking about like iPhones, for example, like these publishers know that advancements in that technology will sell because it's like it will generate iPhone technology sort of thing. So I can see how that would
Yeah.
become like almost like a mini market in itself.
Kind of a market, kind of, but
So
it's not. But it's a market controlled by one entity.
sure, but I can sort of see how that would
Sure.
work, where
Okay.
they can look at the market and be like, we need to. This is what we have to work to. Like we know what will sell here, so
Right. Right. Right.
let's do that here, sort of thing. Like I
Ah.
can almost wrap my head around that. But when
Yeah.
as soon as you start talking about this confidence value in the results, like you have to have a set. It's like, oh, this is the cutoff for publishing, by the way, guys. It's like, well, no one's going to have that in the
Yeah.
vast majority of things they do, so they're going to just flunk it, aren't they? They're going to just
Yeah.
like. So like it's gonna be like the answer will be like 9.5, but they're looking for 9.4, so just rub out the 5
Right.
and
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
write 4.
Around
You
an
know,
error type of thing.
yeah, exactly.
And the thing is, as well, it's like it's not even you and I speculating on it. It's been like proven. Like there was a study. I didn't read about this in my research actually, but I read about it years ago. Basically, they put it online and they applied to a journal, and it was deliberately complete bullshit. It was a study about how people under certain scenarios can potentially tell the future. But obviously, it was like sounded much fancier than that. It had tons and tons of techno babble and all that type of shit. And the idea was that they submitted this paper to like 5 different journals. Actually, I think it was like 25. It was tons of different journals just to see who would take it. And like it was like 50%, maybe more than 50% said that this was legit, even after the peer review process. So they got it publicized, it went online, and then they wrote another paper, a follow-up, which basically said like there are clear deficiencies in the publicizing industry. We are failing on these fronts. And then they applied with that paper to the original publicizer that publicized the bullshit document. So what they did was rejected the second one and took down the first one. So like they just like wrote that off the history, because it's like they don't want people to know that they're publicizing shit that's complete bullshit. So let's hide up the past, erase the past, so there's something that shouldn't be there, and then basically they like fucking defamed them. They're like really inflammatory towards the group. They're like saying like, you think this whole process is a complete sham type of thing, and the group was like, it is a sham. We're trying to prove that, But it's a perfect example of how this is no longer to do with science. This is to do with money.
You can see it's a good example of how when we talk about corruption, I just don't believe that anymore that corruption just happens on one level. It's not one layer that just corrupts the whole thing. So you can see how you would submit a paper that you've sort of like fudged a little bit to get your answers in, like that's corrupt straight away. You've got the journal who says, yep, this looks like it would be something published, but they're not like scientists. They're just like, yeah, this looks like something we could do. Get to the peer reviewers, and the peer reviewers are also scientists that want their papers published as well. So they're inclined to say yes to get more and more papers published, so that when they submit them, it's like they'll keep sort of churning them out. It's like a you scratch my back sort of deal, like you said earlier. So they'll say yes to other people say yes to them. There's like a little bit of corruption there. It then goes back into the journal and gets published out, and then it gets charged for it. Meanwhile, it's been charged 3 separate times to the public. There's a little bit of corruption there. Like it builds up, and all of a sudden you're like, once you step back and you look at the whole process, you're like, what the fuck just happened?
I know.
And like, he's not really corrupt. Neither is she. Neither are they. And neither is this entity. But like all together, when you stand back, you're like corruption all the way through it. I think that's just what money does. I don't think there's any way to like stop that because you have to be generating money at all points. And if you're not generating more money than you were yesterday, you're dog shit. So you have to be doing that. And that's just what's happening here. It's became, it's taken this pure field that should just be about technological advancement. That should just be about benefiting society, humanity. And it's because money's now been applied, it's just seen the same level of corruption as every other fucking agency in the world.
Sad.
It's sad, aye.
There's like a completely other like humanitarian aspect to this as well. It's completely with like the money and that type of thing in the direction of science. And that's when you kind of ask yourself, like, what we're effectively doing is enacting barriers to knowledge. That's what's happening here. Like, people cannot go out there and start researching an area of science that they don't know about unless you're part of a uni or unless you're part of some type of funded institution. It's like so I fucking imagine like someone just like last year, they're like all their family died because of COVID. What they do.
Wow.
What would you do? Imagine the type of person that would just, there's a lot of imagining, just like devotes their entire life to science. That's the reasonable reasonable thing you can imagine someone doing. It's like, I'm going to fucking solve this COVID. And like, I'm not professionally trained. I don't have a degree. I'm going to teach myself this because I have fuck all else to do. That's that's something that seems reasonable. Something that seems truly noble.
Imagine.
Yeah, that seems truly noble. Like, because people do self-teach them things. Like, they self-teach themselves these type of subjects, you know. But this is impossible now, because if you were to ever try and research this, you'd need like 100 different papers, and then it would cost between like £30 and £100 each. And then if you actually did make any scientific discovery off of what you've done in your own free time in your fucking garage, you could never ever get publicized, you know. So it's like, it's like removing the barriers for the public to take part in this. Because like the example I have is like, fucking, see, do you think like the Wright brothers, you know, they weren't part of a university, but they at the same time, they didn't rediscover Maxwell's wave equation on their own. They had to use public information that was already out there. They had to, like, I was going to say email, but they would have like wrote letters to universities to ask for their findings, to collaborate all this
They're
knowledge.
the ones that did the plane, didn't they? They flew. Yeah,
that's right. They're the flyers. So like,
yeah.
these guys, they were a great example of two guys that self-taught themselves this field by building upon the foundation knowledge that they had available to them and come up with an incredible invention. These days, unless you're supported by a body, that's just not possible, you know. It's never going to happen because there's so many barriers to entry, but specifically financially.
All right. As my follow-up question to that was going to be, do you think people in today's society find their way into these institutions? You know, so obviously you and I, for example, had enough intelligence to go to university, so we did go to university. I was wondering if you thought that people that could make these discoveries, obviously not us, but these fucking intelligent, genius people, they would just find themselves in these institutions. They would just find themselves in university anyway.
Think so. No. Well, maybe these days they'd have to, but the thing is that they shouldn't have to. Like, that's the question I have for you. Should knowledge be free? Fundamentally.
Yes.
I think I'm with you there. You know, I think this is something that's just like, it's almost should be like water, you know.
So an awful lot of people checking their podcast service there, going, is it still playing? No. I mean, yeah, it's like we said earlier about the NHS. It's like I think there are just some things that can't be like privatized, like knowledge, because you've discovered something, obviously, but you don't own the thing that you've discovered. You've just discovered that it exists. You don't. Surely you can't own the fact. You know, like, for example, in the one I used earlier, if you're talking about guys in a lab figuring out the wing profile that would like make fuel more efficient, that is a physical phenomenon that exists in the world. You know, depending on the shape. Maybe you could own the shape. You know, but like the knowledge of that. How can you own that? Because it's not something that you haven't created that as a scientist. You've just found it.
Yeah,
you know,
you can like patent the implementation of it, and that's fine. And say you need to come up with your own methods because I spent my fucking 5 years working my arse off, and you're not going to use this after I've done the work. And so patents make sense. You're right, but the knowledge itself, you know, man, like, yeah, it feels wrong. And I also kind of believe as well that, like, it must, I don't know if this is true or not, actually, because people are quite lazy, but surely paywalls when it comes to education must result in an increase in misinformation. You know, like, you'll be watching a YouTube video and folk will be like, oh, don't take my word on it, guys, or don't research this yourself. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I most certainly have. Well, I will try and research it myself, and I fucking can't. You know, because it's behind a goddamn paywall, and I can't. There's a paper, like, we've fucking some of the studies we've done, like, see, particularly when we talk about like trans stuff on the channel, oftentimes I'll try and read about these studies, and trying to get a fucking hold of that is just more or less impossible, you know.
Yeah, because those studies have also been wiped from the face of the earth at the same time. So,
well, yeah, the studies we're looking at anyway, there may be some truth to that.
Yeah, but that's the ones that are like critical. Yeah,
but that's the example of it. It's like, we're talking about knowledge that's just much, much harder to be disseminated between the population right now. We have the fucking internet at our fingertips. And you're telling me that work that was carried out in the 1960s is like behind a fucking paywall now? Like, it makes me so thankful for fucking Sci-Hub. And like, that's one last point I'd like to mention, was that, I can't remember her name, Alexandria, that works at Sci-Hub. I genuinely My next question is going to be, do you know what Sci-Hub is? But Alexandria, she's
No.
like, what? But hands down, contributed the most to science in the last 50 years than anyone else. Like Alexander Graham Bell, Einstein, don't fucking hold a candle to this woman. Because Alexandria,
That's quite a big.
oh, well, wait until you fucking hear what I say, man. Like, she owns this website, which is called Sci-Hub, which is basically kind of like, it's kind of like the Pirate Bay or the Napster of papers, you know?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's owned. She lives in Kazakhstan, and I think she threw the code together like in one afternoon type of thing. Basically, it's like a database where people can upload papers, and I don't know how exactly it works, but they're able to like break into depositories and get papers off other people and shit like that. And basically, it's a free online tool where you can just copy and paste either the scientific the journal entry, like the actual article number, or the name, and there's like 80 million or something like that articles on there, and you can just plug it right in and you'll get it right up. And like this woman, I have absolutely no doubt, has led to so many people developing interest in science. He's led to so many undergrads getting through university, so many researchers, and see the amount of people in industry that rely on her like single-handedly, I think is unbelievable in terms of access to knowledge. She's just an absolute fucking saint, and she's been sued for 15 grand right now by that company I mentioned earlier on.
15 grand.
No, sorry, 15 million. 15 million.
Oh, okay, that's a bit more serious then. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
No,
Elsevier, that's it.
when you said when you were talking about her being like on par with like Einstein and Graham Bell and stuff like that, I was like, I don't think I haven't like heard of this woman.
Yeah,
But then
sure, yeah.
I should have known, I guess, that it was like a technological advancement or like a backdoor or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. She's not like writing papers. She's letting people have access to the papers.
And the sad thing about it is she probably didn't make any money off that.
Oh no, no, yeah, no. It's completely through donations. The website runs through donations, and apparently I saw an
Oh
interview with her.
wow.
Yeah. It's basically like a fucking Wikipedia type of thing.
That's the kind of person that you would fucking pay, isn't it? Like you look at this paywall and it's like fucking £30 per a paper, and you're like, no fucking way. And there's a woman that's like doing it from Kazakhstan that's getting you in for free, and you're like, I'll
Exactly.
pay her.
I'll give you a fucking I'll give you £30 for this. You know what?
Yeah, exactly. Like how many papers are you like going through on her website, and it's like, yeah, I will give her money. It's like Wikipedia.
Yeah. I see. The amount of times I've relied on Sci-Hub in my life is like it's a lot, man. I had to get a paper for my work, and someone said to me, "Oh, do you have any access at university to get hold of this paper?" And I was like, "I don't need access at uni." I was like, "You ever heard of Sci-Hub?" And they were like, "Oh, best." It's a fucking joke as well. It's like best we don't hang around any of those Russian sites. Just forget you told me about that. And I was like, well, I'm gonna keep using it, but sure, but sure. It's like fucking. It's unbelievable, man. How much of an incredible resource that fucking website is, and it's so sad what's happened to her. Honestly, it's really upsets me. Actually, I think she's like, see, if you lived her life, you could die so happy, and know that you've done like, a great
that was
thing.
just what I was about to say. I was just about to say, even though it probably like the aftermath of that might be really shit for her, like what she's like contributed to the world, like just by
Oh yeah,
like just thinking about the amount of scientists that must have used this website to like get papers that they didn't pay for, how free that she made knowledge. That's truly noble. She can honestly look back at her time and be like,
yeah, exactly.
Well done. That's enough for like a lifetime of good.
The really, really, really sad thing is that I have no doubt that in a couple of years she'll be found dead somewhere. It's like it's the same that happened to the founder of Reddit. It's the same that happened to all these guys that like breach databases and make public information available that should have been not available. It's like they will either go insane and fucking kill themselves, but under weird circumstances. I'm telling you, man, it's gonna happen, and it's just fucking such bullshit. That's I said. Like, I don't know if you knew, but it's like the exact same with like this co-founder of Reddit. He was like a brilliant coder, brilliant hacker. He's able to like break into all these different databases and shit like that. And basically, he kind of did a Snowden, where he like went to the FBI database, got hold of. No, he didn't do a Snowden, but he did a similar thing. He got into a hold of a database, got a hold of like millions upon millions of academic papers, and made them freely available to the public. But basically, like he was like. He ended up killing himself in a jail cell or something like that, and now like Reddit completely like purges him from history. Like, see, when you go to like their history, it says like website was initially founded by da 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 and da da da. It's like he's gone, man. He will never be remembered. Like a fucking saint, He's like one of these people that's just been martyrdomed through history.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also another topic for another day.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
companies and
Snowden, man.
governments, it's like, do they kill people
Do
off? You
they
know?
kill people? Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll literally be what that episode's called. Do governments kill people?
That'll
Brackets, yes.
that'll be our last episode. So
Yeah, yeah.
we'll be found dead in our homes after that
Yeah,
one.
yeah. Lewis drowned in the shower the next day. It was bizarre.
Yeah, exactly. Scott, he's been battling depression for a long time. Killed by a train.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. It shot him.
yeah.